Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this edition of Sunday Morning Live. It is Super Bowl Sunday 2025. So hopefully you'll be able to take some time to join me or watch by replay. If you watch by replay, let me know in the chat. And I'm going to do the normal housekeeping here. So everybody that wants to watch this can watch it. So give me just a second. I've got to change the setting for some reason to public and Facebook. And then I want to share it to the New Day Global community group. Just want to make sure I get that done. This also gives people time that want to jump on live to jump on live. All right, let's get started. Running just a few minutes behind, but I guess that's normal for me. Doesn't seem to matter how much I try to be on time. I seem to mess that up. So anyway, before we jump into the topic, if you read the description, I'm going to talk about revisioning God. And I want to do this sort of as a thought experiment and sort of want to do it together. So please feel free to share in the comments. I'll definitely try to keep up with the comments as much as I can in real time. I don't always see every comment. For some reason, I haven't figured that out yet. And then I'll try to go back through them at the end. But before we jump into the topic and sort of explore this topic of revisioning God, what would it be like, or God revised, what would it be like if we, after we deconstruct, we revision what God might be like, or what a relationship with God, and I'm using quotations on purpose, what a relationship with God might look like out of some of these revised ideas or out of this revisioning. In other words, if we extricate the concept of a supreme being, the concept of a creator, the concept of a source, if we extricate that from all the religious ideas and ideologies that we have that primarily dominates the West, at least, the Abrahamic idea and the Abrahamic vision, the foundational stories being found in the book of Genesis, right? The foundational stories being God created the earth in 7 days, who created the universe, whatever, created everything in 7 days, 6 days actually, rested on the seventh day. And then the origins of humanity coming out of the Garden of Eden and all that goes with that religion. All that goes, not religion, all that goes with that in terms of original sin, that's what I meant to say, and the fall and sin nature and humanity. And then from a Christian perspective, Jesus coming to redeem us. And then the other foundational story is that of Abraham and Abraham's discovery or encounter with the true God, right? Or what they say is the true God. And the foundation of that story being the sacrifice of Isaac. If we strip away all of that stuff, what are we left with? And how do we then proceed? That's what I'm often exploring on this channel and challenging and seeking people to, or trying to get people to seek and to think about in terms of how they live their life. But before we jump into all of that, I want to ask you a very simple question. I want you to just take a moment, and if you're not driving or operating heavy equipment, you're in a place where you can just go within for a minute. I want you to sort of maybe close your eyes. You don't have to do this closing your eyes, but that's a suggestion. But whatever way is right for you, I want you to check in with yourself. Check in with your body, how you're feeling, what's on your mind currently, sort of shutting out the external world and checking in on the inside. And I want to ask you this very simple question. How are you doing? Or maybe more specifically, how do you feel? How do you feel? Now, our feelings are all context dependent, right? So you may be feeling one way or another based on the time of day that you're watching this, based on whatever you have planned for your day, based on whatever happened last night. But just take a minute and go inside and ask yourself right now in this moment, how do I feel? Forget about all the influences, what's influencing it. Forget about the stories that you might be telling yourself that's influencing it in your mind. Forget about your thoughts. Just how are you doing, or how do you feel? And then I want you to ask yourself another question. This would be the question. How do you feel most days? Or what is your baseline for how you feel? What is your primary state of being that you're bringing into the world? Just try to identify that as much as you can. And again, I realize that our emotions, our feelings, our sense of well-being or unwell-being, get to that in a second, it's going to fluctuate with whatever's going on in our lives. It's going to fluctuate with the circumstances and stuff like that. But as you're asking this question to yourself, either now or what is your overall state of being, do you feel tense? Do you feel at ease? Are you mostly aware of something in your physical body that's demanding your attention, having been someone who had to deal with chronic constant pain? If you'd asked me a few years ago before I got that resolved, immediately my mind would go to the pain that was in my body. And a lot of my mental energy and a lot of my life was designed around trying to shut that out, trying to close that out and live life normally. So if you have constant chronic physical pain, your answer is probably going to be different than someone who doesn't. You might find it a little bit more difficult to get to the aspects of your being that are emotional and what you're feeling. But I think we can all answer this question if we're honest with ourselves, to some degree or another. Do you feel hostile? If we spend most of our time in a stressed out state, if we're stressed out a lot, overwhelmed with life, stressed out for whatever reason, maybe we're going through something personally, or maybe we're just stressed out about the state of the world. Maybe we're upset about the state of our country or the politics that are going on, whatever the case may be. But I guess what I'm asking is do you have an overall sense of well-being? Do you feel and have an overall sense of being unwell? Do you feel primarily hostile to your environment, to things that are going on, to circumstances, to the present? Or do you feel hostile towards people that don't agree with you or think like you? Or do you feel primarily hospitable, where with hostility, whereas with hostility, there's maybe some underlying level of anxiety, maybe some underlying level of depression, hypervigilance, always on guard, always aware, always have your armor on, so to speak, kind of live behind various walls, defenses that you've built up? Or do you feel hospitable? Hospitality would be, or feeling hospitable to the world implies a sense of safety. Not just safety regarding your physical well-being, your physical life, but a sense of safety that goes deeper than that, a sense of safety that involves emotional safety, or an openness to the world around you, an openness to life, and accepting of it, an openness, maybe more importantly, to other people, an openness to new ideas, new concepts. That requires sort of an ability to be yourself, which requires a sense of safety. Is it safe for you to be yourself? And if it's not safe for you to be yourself, primarily overall, then when is it safe for you to be yourself? Where is it safe for you to be yourself? What aspects of yourself do you have to edit? What aspects of yourself do you have to hide in various different contexts or relationships with people in which you feel safe, or in which you feel as though you have to be guarded, you have to be hidden? Aaron, why are you asking this question? What does this have to do with anything? Probably not this group, probably not people who I'm speaking to or who watch this channel much. Jason says, Grand Rising. Grand Rising to you, Jason. Marietta says, good morning. Good morning, Marietta. Looks like I'm only seeing comments from YouTube today. Not sure if I can see comments yet. Maybe no one's commented on Facebook yet. Pretty sure it's active out there. So Aaron, what does this have to do with your topic today? And what I was starting to say was probably not with this group, but anyone who has deconstructed, anyone who's questioned their faith, anyone who's been on this journey of a crisis of faith in any way, shape, or form, has had to do a lot of critical thinking, a lot of rethinking, a lot of re-evaluating, has had to have a lot of questions that would rise up that would challenge the predominant worldview that they had immersed themselves in this case being religious, right? Probably for most of us, some form of Christianity, although that certainly doesn't have to be the case with everyone. But we've gone through, all of us that have been on this process, or in this process and on this journey, we've all gone through some levels of reflection, or what they call in psychology and neuroscience metacognition. The word cognition is simply a fancy term for thinking, and metacognition, therefore, meta means to go above or outside of it. So metacognition would be the ability to think about your thinking. So for example, when I was totally committed to evangelical Christianity and to the evangelical vision of God and reality and the cosmos, then I had a certain way of viewing the world, a certain way of viewing reality, a certain way of viewing myself as a result of that. So I have this view of reality that there is a supreme being that we call God, that is Trinitarian in nature, which means that the Son is of the same essence, as the church fathers would have said, is of the same being, the same essence, the same substance as God, eternal and the creator. And this is the Son, and this Son showed up 2,000 years ago in the person of Jesus, and showed up specifically for the purpose of redeeming us from our sins, saving us from our sins. And that salvation has to be applied, has to be appropriated by what you believe. Do you believe this historical account of this person, Jesus? Do you believe historically in his literal death on the cross, his literal resurrection? And if so, what does that mean? What does that mean to you as a person? How then shall you live? And that formed the entire construct of what I would call my paradigm, my primary way of viewing the world, or you could say my principal way of viewing the world, because a principle is a foundation upon which everything else comes later. In other words, in order for me to deconstruct, I had to go down to the very core, the very essence of my belief system. I had to look at the very taproot, the very cornerstone, not just the foundation, but the cornerstone, that stone within the foundation that held up the rest of the foundation of the building, and the foundation holding up the rest of the building. And all of that was affecting and impacting the way that I felt, the way that I showed up in the world, the way that I showed up for other people, the way that I showed up for myself. And it dictated, or at least provided the parameters. If it did not dictate, in many ways it dictated, but it provided the parameters. Oh, I should add this, that within this worldview, the primary way of knowing truth was through the scriptures, that this God not only gave us his son Jesus to die for our sins, but then gave us the record about Jesus and preserved it for us in the four gospels and the writings of Paul, and then some supplemental writings of John and James and Peter and Jude, and all this, reality that is given to us, or philosophy, really a philosophy of life. And by philosophy, I don't just mean good ideas, but I mean concepts about the nature of the world, concepts. In other words, it answered the questions, who am I? Why am I here? And where am I going? And so the Christian worldview that became foundational, and then the Bible became the means through which I would think through everything else and try to show up for everyone else and everything else within my life. And there wasn't a lot of metacognition. Once those foundations were set in place, once that worldview was fully embraced, and it gave me the tracks, so to speak, to run on. In other words, that worldview provided certain focus for me, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a second. It provided a certain way of understanding the world, a way of understanding myself, a way of understanding the nature of life. Again, answering the question, who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? And that, to a large degree, dictated not only my outcomes in life, not only what I was allowed for myself to experience or explore even in the world, but how I felt about myself, how I felt about being in the world, how I felt about the world. Ultimately, whether I felt hostile, which I certainly did at times, because there's a lot of hostility in this worldview, especially if you believe in original sin and you believe that the world is a dark and evil place, and you believe that there is Satan and his minions out there trying to deceive you, and God and his angels out there trying to protect you. I don't know how many of you would remember the Christian author Frank Peretti, but one of the first things that I read as I was forming my worldview, these foundational beliefs when I was a young man, one of the first, the first Christian novel that I read was Frank Peretti's book, This Present Darkness. And I think he developed a trilogy out of that. Maybe it was just 2 books, because I remember Piercing the Darkness. And it was all about, if you're not familiar with the works, it was all about this cosmic battle between good and evil, this cosmic battle between God and his angels and his people, known as Christians, and Satan and his demons and his people that were trying to rule the world. And all of this fit within the context of some kind of Bible prophecy. So it affected my view of the future. And all of this impacted and affected the way that I showed up in the world, the way that I felt. So there was a lot of hostility. There are hostile forces out there. Even in many concepts in scripture, the way they're translated, particularly I'm thinking of a verse in the book of Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 3, that says, the heart is deceitful and wicked above all things, who can know it? Or Proverbs 3:6, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not to your own understanding. Or Romans 8:3, the carnal mind, I think it's 8:3, the carnal mind is enmity against God. The spiritual mind is life and peace. And so there was hostility both within and without, the hostility towards my own sin nature, towards my own deceptive heart, right? So there was a division, there was a great dividing that took place. There was a battle between the flesh, which represented these lower nature impulses, and this higher nature way of being that we called spirit. So there was a lot of hostility. but then able to find hospitality among my own people who thought like me, people who believed in me, people that were on the right team, people that were fighting for good, people that believed like I believed, the saved community versus the lost community, the believers versus the unbelievers. And our believers were our brothers and sisters. And so there was a level of hospitality. So when I was in that environment, there was not this hostility and whatever that I was feeling. There was a sense of safety. There was a sense of belonging. There was a sense of hospitality. It provided all kinds of different stuff. But all of this, my point is, all of this affected the way that I felt, the way my sense of well-being or my sense of unwell-being, because I think we could bifurcate our state, our emotional life, our mental health, if you will, as coming from a principle, a foundational place of either an overall sense of well-being or an overall sense of unwell-being. And if we have an overall sense of well-being, then we can develop things like openness and vulnerability and love and trust. And out of that can come joy, right? Or an overall sense of unwell-being, out of which comes a lot of anxiety, out of which comes a lot of hostility, out of which comes a lot of anger, out of which comes a lot of aggression, a lot of angst, a lot of avoidance, procrastination, all of those things. Procrastination is simply a way of avoiding something that we deem or perceive as being unpleasant. And so we can end up putting our life on layaway. For those of you that remember what layaway is, where you would go into a store and try to buy something, you didn't have the money to buy it, and you didn't want to do it on credit, so you could put it on layaway, and you'd show up every month and make payments on this thing that the store was holding back for you until you paid it all off, and then you could take it home. And some people approach life that way. They're constantly avoiding things because of the unpleasantness of those things. And that all comes from a state of hostility, which, or at least from a state of being in fight or flight. And flight, running away from something or avoiding something, is the strategy. It's the emotional energy, if you will. It's the emotional state behind all procrastination. And so it boils down to this bifurcation that I'm talking about. Do I have a sense of well-being or a sense of unwell-being? Aaron, what does all this have to do? Well, all of this has to do with my premise, my thesis today, the way I'm thinking about this stuff, is that how we view the world on a fundamental, foundational level becomes the matrix or the womb or the mother out of which all our other experiences, thoughts, ideas, and emotional experiences come from. And most people don't spend a lot of time in metacognition or in reflecting back upon themselves to think about, how do I really think fundamentally and foundationally about the world? What I would call your paradigm. Your paradigm is a set of assumptions. Your paradigm is a set of presuppositions, things that you assume to be true, not things that you know to be true for a fact, but things that you assume to be true, things that you suppose to be true based on all the influences of your life and based on your values and your choices and your decisions and how your brain even sorts information from the world around us and forms into some kind of a cohesive idea, basic idea of what the world is, what exists out there, and how it works, or how we answer the question for us personally: who am I? Why am I here? And where am I going? And if I'm totally confused about those answers to those questions, then I'm in some kind of an existential crisis. And if my mode of operation is procrastination or avoidance, then I'm just going to avoid those questions, and I'm going to involve myself pretty much in daily life and with distractions, and I'm going to spend the vast majority of my time doom scrolling on Facebook or binging series on Netflix, or for some people, I'm going to throw myself into my work or my family or my relationships, anything out here to distract me from those deeper issues and those deeper questions, to prevent me from doing any kind of metacognition and thinking about, how do I really presuppose the world works? How do I assume the world works? And are those assumptions and presuppositions valid, or are they invalid? Are they working for me is a more important question, or are they not working for me? And so, in a very real sense, and this is going to tie into what I was talking about with the left-hand path, because in a very real sense, most people are, and I'm using this term affectionately, it's emotionally loaded, it's a triggering term, but I'm trying to get around all of that and just say most people probably, at least in my experience, maybe your experience is different. Maybe, as my friend Derek Day says, your mileage varies. Most people are sheep. Most people are sheep. What do I mean by that? Most people are following the herd. I was talking to Michelle Cohen last week, and she brought up something really interesting that I've been chewing on all week long. And she talked about this concept of mimetic desire. It's a big term, mimetic, right? Mimetic desire. What the root of mimetic or mimetic philosophy, Rene Girard is one of the primary philosophers who did a lot of work on mimetic desires and how it affects us in society, how it affects us as individuals. But the word comes from the word to mimic, to imitate. And so this idea of mimetic desire is that most of our desires, most of our wants that we have as human beings comes from imitating what everybody else wants. And they use this in advertising and marketing a lot to get your attention. The idea is that most people don't buy things because they really need it, not necessarily because they really want it with a want that originates with them, but because they find out everybody else wants it. We can do this with knowledge. Everybody else is in the know, but I'm not in the know. And so I'm going to find out what they know that I don't know so I can be like them. So it's really easy to just look at people and things and situations on a surface level and say, I want what they have. That was kind of the whole game of religion. Kind of the whole idea of evangelism was that we needed to have a good witness. And what would it mean to have a good witness? It meant that we had something in our lives that other people were lacking. And so if we were manifesting peace, living peacefully, if we were living, at least this is how it used to be, if we were loving people, if we were joyful and happy, then people would look at our lives and they would say, I want what you have. And then you could override any critical thinking or any arguments because it would be based on this idea of mimetic thinking. And so this would penetrate every level of religious life, so much so that I would go to pastors' conferences, and the speakers at the pastors' conferences were always people who were perceived, at least, as having knowledge that other people didn't have, that they needed to share, that other people needed. And usually this was based on the size and impact of your ministry. So I remember one of the speakers and leaders and mentors early on in my life had was British, but had gone to India and had produced revival in India that impacted hundreds of thousands of people. That's a pretty big impact. People that had mega churches were the ones that we listened to. You know, how many people? And so that would be the question at every pastor conference and gathering. It didn't matter whether it was local or whether it was national, meaning the United States, whether it was regional. We belonged to a regional network for a while. But at every level, it was like, how big is your church? Because there was an estimation of your worth and your value based on the size of the impact of your ministry. And so I learned, just as an experiment, because we never had a big church, right? I think we had a very effective, successful one, but we didn't have a big one. And so if you said, you know, especially in starting out, well, we got 30 people, well, you were embarrassed of that. You were almost ashamed of that. You would try to avoid that topic when it would come up, because invariably it was going to come up. And then we bought a building that was about almost 12,000 square feet. And so people would say, how big's your church? And I would say 12,000. And I would get a totally different response from people than if I said, well, we got a couple hundred. All of that's based in mimetic desires, mimicking, imitating everybody. I'm looking at the crowd. I'm looking at what they have. I'm looking at and today we might do this with the number of subscribers that you have on YouTube. How big is your channel? How big is the footprint of your podcast or your outreach? How many people have bought your books? Because we measure value and impact, truth, even reality. What does everybody else think, or what do other people think? Because we tend to live with this idea, some of us, that other people have something that we don't have, and then we are left out. This is the entire thinking behind FOMO, the fear of missing out. And we do this on almost every level. If somebody has a new car, somebody has a Tesla. They have a Tesla, they have an electric vehicle. Well, they care about the environment, they care about the carbon footprint, or they just have all these cool features. I mean, one of the things that my sister owns a Tesla, Derek Day owns a Tesla. And one of the things you could do was, I think for Christmas, is download a program that would make, I don't know, the lights and the horn and whatever in your Tesla play Christmas music or something like that. So, oh, and look at how many Teslas were sold this week, or look at how many people are investing in Tesla, not just because they think it's the stock market works this way, not just because it's a good investment. It may or may not be a good investment, not my place to say, but we'll look at what is everybody else saying. And so we can get into this mimetic desire with, well, I need to get a Tesla, or I need to get a new car. I haven't bought a new car in 7 or 8 years. And my neighbor buys a new car or leases a new car every 3 years. So I need to do that, or I need a bigger house, or I need to buy the latest clothes or the latest fashions, or I can't grow my hair out long, because you don't grow your hair out long, especially if you're in your 50s. And I had personal reasons for wanting to do that, but the personal reasons didn't matter. And so I'd go to work and people will tell me, cut your hair, and that maybe that's not suitable for your profession. All of that is based on mimetic desire. And so all of that is the sheep-like behaviors. So the ancient idea, remember I said that this idea of the left being evil and the right being right, that's why we call it the right side, because it's the idea that this is the right way. This is the way that it needs to be. And if it's left, it's sinister. I've covered that in many of my videos. But the ancient Sanskrit idea, where this concept, even though it's in Western thought and Western philosophy, if we look at Kabbalah as part of the Western esoteric tradition, which it is, or we just look at it within its context within Judaism, evil comes out of the left pillar on the tree of life. Lilith and Samael spin off of Gevurah. But the idea in the ancient Sanskrit where this originates is that the person who goes left is the person who awakens, the person who wakes up. So this is popular today. We talk about an awakening, and we can get stuck in mimetic desire with that. Well, everybody else has an awakening. They're talking about their awakening. I need to have an awakening too. How do I have an awakening? I'm going to go out and listen to people that have had an awakening because they have something I don't have. But the true idea of the left-hand path is that one of the sheep, if you will, in the sheepfold, wakes up and wanders off on its own, leaves the herd to explore something, to find pasture somewhere else, leaves the shepherd, leaves the voice of the shepherd. And traditionally, then those people that woke up were known as goats. Goats that went and fed on something else. Didn't follow the herd to the greener pastures, didn't follow the shepherd who leads me into green pastures and beside still waters, but wakes up and goes off and eats something foreign, something alien to the group. So therefore it becomes a goat. This is why Jesus talked about the sheep entering the kingdom and the goats. He didn't just randomly, willy-nilly pick. Why didn't he pick dogs and cats? Why didn't he pick sheep and wolves? Because this ancient concept that goats deviate from the herd. They deviate from the herd mentality. In other words, they're in some way able to disentangle themselves from those mimetic desires, and they go off here and they eat foreign stuff. They eat weird stuff. They eat alien stuff. And so it's the goats then that go into eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels, and it's the sheep. What we miss is the underlying subconscious reality, the metaphoric reality that speaks to deeper levels of our consciousness, that actually bypasses most critical thinking, that bypasses a lot of the left hemisphere processes and goes straight to the right hemisphere processes, or gets into the heart, or gets into the foundational layer of consciousness, which thinks in imagery and not in language. And so the idea then that if you're a goat, if you deviate from the herd, that somehow makes you evil, that somehow makes you destined for eternal hellfire. And the sheep, that gets you going along with the herd, following the voice of the shepherd, that gets you into everlasting life. It's why the goat is typically a representation of the devil. It's why goats were killed in ancient Israel on the Day of Atonement, and the scapegoat was sent out bearing the sins of the people, because the goats. So here's my point. There's nothing wrong with being a goat. In some ways, if we talk about being awakened, certainly if we talk about the left-hand path, which is where the ancient imagery out of which this comes, someone who awakens or breaks from what we might call the consensus trance. I'm still in my introduction and I'm 36 minutes into this already. Breaks out of the consensus trance. What is a consensus trance? What is a trance? A trance technically is a state of focus. In order to have focus, I have to be looking at something to the exclusion of other things. If I am focused on my screen, I'm not paying attention to what's in the background. I'm focused. So essentially, in my perception, at least, I'm shutting out what's in the background because I'm focused on my screen. If I lift my eyes and look here now, the screen becomes peripheral and blurry, and I'm not focused on it, but I'm focused on what was in the background. And so both of those are trances. We do this mentally. So a mental trance is, and we're all entranced. Every single one of us is entranced because we are finite beings. We do not have the ability to know everything all at once. Maybe we can know everything, but we can't know it all at once. We have to focus on one thing. Multitasking, they've discovered in neuroscience, is a myth. I don't actually multitask, or in order to multitask, I should say it that way, I have to shift my focus from one thing to another. It's impossible to be focused mentally on two things all at once. So a consensus trance then is a narrow worldview. It's a narrow way of seeing the world. It's a narrow way of seeing reality. It's a narrow way of seeing life that then determines the rails upon which the train of my mind, the train of my state of being runs. And what views I have, what rails I have, is a result of these foundational questions about life that then turn into whether I have a sense of well-being or I have a sense of unwell-being. Aaron, why are you talking about this? Because a consensus trance then is I'm in the herd. I'm a sheep. I'm following the right-hand path. It's another way to look at the right-hand path or the left-hand path. If we strip it down from if we strip down the basic concept of left-hand path and right-hand path, if we take away all the religious and spiritual implications of it, meaning those that are on the right-hand path are dedicated to merging with nature or God or whatever, and those on the left-hand path are more on a path of self-actualization with their spirituality. If we strip all of that away from it, at the end of the day, what we're left with is the right-hand path consists of our primary worldview being that which goes along with the herd, or am I over here like a goat eating something else? Then I'm said to be on the left-hand path. So part of the work of the left-hand path then is to at least question the consensus trance. What is the consensus trance? It's the worldview. It's the view about the world that comes from the dominant view of society. The dominant view of the society in which I'm born. This gets into questions of where is the power and who has the power? Who is shaping that worldview? Who is shaping those thoughts? These are questions that most people don't ask. Not only do they not ask themselves the questions, what are my assumptions and what do I believe? They don't ask, why do I believe it? Or how do I know what I know at this foundational level? Most people never get to the question of what is it that I know that's determining my sense of well-being or my sense of unwell-being, much less ask the question, how do I know what I know? If I look at that layer at all, then I have to step back in another layer of metacognition and say, how do I know what I know? And all of us that have gone through any kind of deconstruction have experienced this process to one degree or another. The unfortunate part for a lot of people is that we just change herds, and it's so easy to do. We never really extricate ourselves from mimetic desire. The mimetic theorists would say it's impossible to extricate yourself from mimetic desire, but I'm not sure that's true. But we don't extricate ourselves from that. We simply change herds. We simply jump tracks, if you will, based on whatever's capturing our attention as the predominant and authoritative view. Now we're going with that. So it's very easy historically, if you look at anything in history, if you understand anything about history, the people who have challenged the thought leaders and the power brokers in any society that have challenged the majority worldview or the dominant worldview in favor of something unique, in favor of their own worldview, has been rejected and seen and perceived as evil. Why? Because it's a threat to the herd. It's a threat to the herd. We've all got to get to these greener pastures, and we get to these greener pastures together, and we have thought leaders or shepherds who are leading us. I'm not talking about in church. I'm not talking about in religion. I'm just talking about the very nature of society. Certainly, we see this in religion. We see this with people like Galileo. We see this in the Spanish Inquisitions. We see this with the Gnostics. We see this at the Council of Nicaea with, I forget the group, somebody can put it in the chat, that was being opposed and lost the battle at the Council of Nicaea for the nature of God and the Trinity and all that stuff, that then became the predominant view of the Western society. And they were seen as heretics, and their books were burned, and they themselves were tortured. We see this in the witch trials, right? Whether they were authentically witches or they were falsely accused of being witches, they were burned at the stake. Why? Because they're not going to the same pastures. They're a threat to our survival. They're a threat to our well-being. They're a threat to our society. And so therefore, those who choose the left-hand path are those who say, wait a minute, I am not going. There are those who break out of the consensus trance. And when you break out of the consensus trance, or you just begin to break out of the consensus trance by saying, I'm going to think differently, then you're perceived as a threat. You are perceived as evil. You are perceived as deceived or less knowledgeable, or, oh, you poor little ignorant soul, you don't know the things that we know. We know this to be true, and we know that to be true. I may have to totally change what I wrote down here because I haven't even gotten to revisioning or God revised yet. But I think you can see where I'm going with this. Here's my question. Here's how I want to tie it back into the beginning. All of this stuff can have a major impact on your sense of well-being or unwell-being. And we don't think about that often enough. We don't think about, I don't think, we think about often enough, how is my perception of the world affecting my sense of being or my sense of well-being? I'm just going to use, because I've talked about it a lot on this channel, and we have, and I appreciate you guys very much for all of you that give your time. Time is your most precious commodity, and to spend this time with me watching the video, whether you're watching it live, you watch it consistently, or you don't watch it consistently, I appreciate you very much. But we can see this in sort of the atheist religious aspects. If I find myself entangled in the most toxic elements of religion, in other words, I find myself living in hostility most of the time because it's me against them, believer against the unbeliever, or I don't feel safe with my own heart. I'm not at home within myself, or I don't feel safe in this world, or I don't feel safe venturing out into the what might be spiritual planes that are out there because it would all be demonic. Or I have an existential dread of going to hell or being judged, or I just think it's creepy that this God in the sky is examining my innermost thoughts, my behaviors, my words, my actions, and my innermost thoughts, and then holding them against a moral template of good and evil. And so if I'm thinking evil, oh my gosh. And all of this could potentially send me to a eternity of eternal conscious torment, or traditionally the resistance to other ideas, and a lot of cases, scientific ideas, anti-science, anti-discovery of new information about the world. And that was the track that I was running on. And so therefore eliminating, I'm not saying, I want to be really clear, I'm not saying this is why people end up atheists. I just think it's definitely part of the process. So I'm not saying this to invalidate atheism itself. I'm simply saying that someone might extricate themselves from the toxic elements of a religion and then find it comforting and find an improved sense of well-being, because I no longer view the world in this scary way with this scary divine figure and with this existential dread of the afterlife. And so therefore now there's all these new discoveries and there's science, this whole vista of information and knowledge has opened up to me. Or maybe I end up going down the New Age track and I discover, I don't know, New Age is such a big label, but I think there are some general things that tend to be true that we label New Age. So belief in reincarnation, belief in past lives, belief in channeling. You think about beings like Bashar or Ra or Seth and the people that have channeled these. This can all be part of it. Tarot cards or oracle cards or card readings, energy work, Reiki, holistic methods of healing that aren't dependent upon allopathic medicine, but perhaps supplements or homeopathy or Reiki or massage. All of these things can probably find some kind of home within New Age beliefs. And so, or astrology. We talked about astrology last week, an amazing episode with Lisa Brown. She's amazing. Thank you, Lisa, if you're watching this, for that episode that you did with us and sharing your information with us once again. But astrology, I know when I was exploring the New Age, it's like astrology opens up tarot and the history of tarot and the power of tarot to speak to the subconscious and give answers to life and focus to life. All of that opened up, and I studied that for many, many years. Or the Western esoteric tradition, which is kind of a combination of Neoplatonism, Hermeticism, and Jewish Kabbalah. All of that is a new way of perceiving God and perceiving the world. All of that opens up. So there's all these new vistas. But what can happen to us is that we can trade one mimetic way of being for another mimetic way of being. And we can say, oh, this is it. It's the scientists are really in the know because they have this superior way of knowing that does not depend on divine revelation, does not depend on intuition, does not depend on what we call subjective experience, but it depends on all this objective information and facts that we're getting. And therefore we know we have a better foundation, a better cornerstone for all the assumptions and presuppositions that we're making about the world and how we're choosing to show up. And maybe it leads to a sense of well-being, and maybe for other people it doesn't lead to a sense of well-being, because for a lot of people, myself included, if I eradicate the idea of God altogether, if I eradicate the idea of a supreme being, if I eradicate if I take a completely physicalist and mechanistic world and operational world view, or at the very least, if I reduce it down so that that which has authority, that which has truth, that which has reliability, that which has validity exists in only those things that are operational and only that which is physicalist. And so therefore, even my own consciousness, even my own ability to observe, my own ability to make decisions about what is real and what is not real, my own ability to make decisions about what has authoritative value in terms of my understanding of the nature of reality, it weighs heavily towards physicalism. It weighs heavily towards operation. And so for me, and I'm speaking for myself, it has many of the same components of religion because it's another consensus trance. Let me explain it this way, because this is one of the, let me give you this thought experiment. I heard something recently in a podcast where someone said they grew up in a part of the United States that was the predominant view of their culture, their family and neighbors and people around them was more akin to folk magic or folk beliefs, or what we call, in a very pejorative way, even using the term folk magic or folk ideas is pejorative. It's colonial. I don't know if I want to touch on that tonight or not, today or not. That we downgrade indigenous tradition, indigenous beliefs, indigenous ideas as being reductionistic, as being superstitious, as being unreal, because we have the real stuff, because we have science and we have all this progress. That's actually a perception, a way of seeing the world, a paradigm that's built on the assumptions and presuppositions and programming of colonialism. But I'll leave that alone. It's colonial worldview. But anyway, I'm listening to this podcast, and this guy grew up in this folk ideologies. And he tells a story about his mother being asked this question, do you believe in ghosts? And it was by some paranormal, they grew up in a region, in an area where, was famous for its hauntings and various different stuff. It's anomalous phenomenon like Bigfoot and lake monsters and all that stuff. And one of these paranormal investigators came and said, well, do you believe in ghosts? And he said, my mom didn't understand the question. She didn't understand the question. What do you mean? Well, do you believe in ghosts? And finally, after having some dialogue with this investigator, she finally understands the question. Oh, well, of course I believe in ghosts. Don't you believe in air? Don't you believe in grass? See, she couldn't understand the question because in her worldview, based on her assumptions and presuppositions that probably potentially had never been thought through or challenged in any way, shape, or form, the question didn't make sense. So I want you to think about it this way. The predominant worldview of humanity, going back as far as we know, the predominant worldview is some form of pantheism, panentheism, or maybe more accurately, panpsychism. Aaron, you're using words that I don't understand what they mean. You don't have to look them up. Basically, it's the idea that everything had a spirit in it. The trees had a spirit. The land has a spirit, a consciousness, a personified consciousness. There's a world of gods and goddesses. There's a world of intermediaries. In Ireland and Scotland, they're called fairies. In the Middle East, they were called jinn. In Greek and Roman, in the Greco-Roman world, they were called daemons, later to be called demons. This world of intermediaries that exist that are metaphysical. In other words, the metaphysical worldview was the predominant worldview, even in the West, for hundreds of years. And the predominant worldview of almost every culture. Sure, there were marginal groups and individuals who took a left-hand path, who believed in physicalism, who believed that physical reality is all there is, right? That's what they believed. But they weren't in any power or of any significance. They were the goats that were off over here eating. I don't mean that as a pejorative. I hope you understood the context of what I'm saying based on my explanation. So the vast majority believed in some form of what we would call panpsychism, that Everything everywhere has consciousness within it. Everything everywhere has some kind of life, some kind of really a personification of things. We might think this is a very childish way of thinking, because as we observe children in their development, we find that they attach personified ideas to inanimate objects. So if you were born in those cultures, that's what you would believe. And if anyone challenged that, you'd think, that's crazy. Don't you have any common sense? And by the same token, please understand this, that we are living in a culture that's dominated by physics, the areas of physics, technology, science, physicalism. Sure, we tolerate other beliefs. Sure, we tolerate other ideologies. We certainly tolerate religion. But it's, we know it's kind of viewed just as sentimental, a little bit less than. It's something else. Even the humanities, even in scholarship, the humanities or things like philosophy or literature or art, especially philosophy, though, it's just kind of the handmaiden, if you will, of operational thinking, science, physicalism. That's the consensus trance. That's the predominant worldview. So we have two primary predominant worldviews available to us, where the power is, where the majority are. Maybe three. Let's say three. Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity in some form, or Islam, all based on the mythos, the stories of Abrahamic religions, or scientism, physicalism. I'm going to reject that in favor of this. Or, as I mentioned, I'm going to go into some kind of New Age thing where I believe in a metaphysical. Now, religion and New Age have the metaphysical in common. What's the metaphysical? Well, physicalism says, and this is where I think this is the major question that I want you to ask yourself, because I think how you believe and how you think about this is going to determine whether or not you have a sense of well-being or a sense of being unwell. This is the primary question. This is the principal question. This is the foundational question, at least as far as I see it. And there is no right answer. And the answer can be different for different people when we're using our well-being or sense of being unwell as the barometer to measure, or as the measuring stick to look at our own assumptions about the world and what they are producing for us as a primary way of being. See, our primary way of being is a direct result of our primary way of viewing. And it comes down to this. When you ask yourself this question, what do I really, 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 really believe about the nature of reality? What do I really believe about the nature of reality? In other words, if I have to play a game of would you rather, or I have to decide this over this, the question becomes, is the world primarily physical or metaphysical? Remember when I said metacognition? Cognition means thought. Meta means to step back from it, to get outside of your own thinking and think about your thinking. Metaphysics then has that same prefix, right? So it's to get outside. It's a worldview that is more than a physicalist worldview. This is why when people say, and I get it, when people say magic is just science that we have not discovered yet. That eventually, that all phenomenon in the world that everyone experiences will eventually be explained by the laws of physics without even realizing it, exist, or maybe they do realize it. Your paradigm is physicalism. Even if you say I'm open to other phenomenon that right now can't be explained by the laws of physics, I believe given enough time, it will be explained by the laws of physics. That's an outright rejection of metaphysical worldview. Because metaphysics says there is more to the world than physics. There is more to life. There is more to being a human being. There's more than just this universe. There's more than just these bodies. There is more than time and space. Metaphysics says there is a reality that transcends time and space. Now, the degree to which you think about or believe in the influence of that reality is going to differ. It's very much going to be on a spectrum. For some people, they may be equal. There's equal parts to reality. We have a physical life, or there's a physical aspect to reality, and there is a metaphysical aspect to reality. That means that there are things, real things, that are outside of time and space, that transcend time and space, that have nothing to do with the laws of physics, that completely defy the laws of physics, and therefore can never be explained by physics. It's also a presupposition. It's also a bias. But that's because I have a metaphysical a worldview of metaphysics. It's the one thing I've never been able to give up on, because I think it's the best explanation of the world. And even if it's not the best explanation of the world for you, it is absolutely the best explanation of the world for me, that contributes the most to my sense of well-being and keeps me out of these states of being unwell or feeling unwell. So therefore, I'm quite comfortable stating that and saying this is what I believe and this is why. You see what I'm saying? That's the crux of the question. Do you believe in a physicalist view of reality, or do you believe in a metaphysical view of reality? And if you believe in a metaphysical view, then you just as stubbornly say, there are things that science will never explain. There are things that will never fit into a metaphysical reality. There are reasons these things happen, but those that are committed to a physicalist worldview will never accept these explanations. They'll write it off as folk religion or superstition or magic or some god doing it. We know there's not a god because you can't prove it. But see, what you're saying is you're demanding, this is what every atheist argument I ever heard. I don't care if it's Richard Dawkins. I don't care if it's Neil deGrasse Tyson. I don't know if he's a atheist. Maybe I shouldn't throw his name in there. Christopher Hitchens, other atheistic ideologies and viewpoints, is you cannot prove God exists. And what they mean is you cannot prove God exists within a worldview of physics, because their train track is physicalism. But if you open up to metaphysics and say there are other things, there are realities out here that are not part of time and space, that are outside of time and space, therefore they cannot be measured nor understood using a logic that's built on the presupposition that physics is all there is and time and space is all there is, and everything, including us, including our consciousness, is the byproduct of time and space. So maybe we do know why these things happen. Maybe that is reproducible, but it'll never be proven physical. And so the physicalist, every atheist I've ever known was a physicalist. I'm not here to harp again. It's just simply, I'm asking you to evaluate at a fundamental level, what do you believe? Ask yourself the question, do you believe in physics or do you believe in metaphysics? Metaphysics does not discount physics, but physics discounts metaphysics. I'm going to say that again. Metaphysics, it's included in the term. Yes, we believe in science. Yes, we believe in physical reality. Yes, we believe in the laws of time and space. Yes, we believe in the brain and all of that stuff and find tremendous value in it, but we don't reduce everything down to that. We have something else that's meta to physics, that is inclusive of physics, but transcends physics, that is inclusive of science, but transcends science. Whereas physicalism does not embrace metaphysics. So then that is the fundamental question. Two giant vistas. So if you say, no, Aaron, I believe in metaphysics, or I find physics, even if it's just this simple, I find physics depressing and meaningless and dystopic and nihilistic. That would be my view. I find those would all be adjectives to describe what I think my life would be like if I went with the consensus trance of physicalism. I find beauty and meaning and purpose and richness and abundance and safety and well-being, knowing there is more to life than these biological processes. There is more to me than electromagnetic energy and atoms and cells flowing through, and the electricity flowing through my brain. There is more to me than what can be measured. There is more to me than what can be observed. There's more to life and reality than what can be measured. This is why I love thinking about the hard problem of consciousness, because so far science can't explain the hard problem of consciousness and never will be able to explain the hard problem of consciousness, because consciousness, at least in my opinion, is a metaphysic. It's a metaphysical reality. So this then opens one to the dilemma, not just the possibility, but the dilemma, the real psychological, emotional, intellectual, and human dilemma. Is there a God? Is there a supreme being? If there is things that are metaphysical, what are they? What's out there? What does that mean to me in my life? And how, and this is where we trip up, how can I have certainty? See, religion provides certainty by saying the way we know is by what the church has told us, by what tradition has told us, and by what the scriptures tell us. That gives us certainty. That's how we know what we know. That's how we can be certain. And then we evaluate everything else through the lens of scripture. Scientism says the only thing we can really know, the authority, is everything that's part of this physical universe, and therefore we'll evaluate everything through that physicalist lens. Metaphysics is an outframe. Metaphysics is a way of thinking about God, thinking about reality, thinking about yourself, thinking about the questions, who am I, why am I here, and where am I going, that receives neither testimony, or at least has extricated itself from both the consensus trance of Western religion and the consensus, which is a part of metaphysics, by the way, and the Western trance of physicalism, and stands outside of both and says, I believe in metaphysics. That's the foundational presupposition. That's the foundational assumption. That is the principal bias, right? I believe in metaphysics. Therefore, I'm open to the possibility of God. I'm open to the possibility of the divine as something that exists, something that I can experience, and something that I can relate to. And perhaps it is nothing like I was told. What if God, and I find God, that's why I put it in quotations in the description, I find it a problematic term. It's interesting, the etymology of the word God. I thought it came from the word good, but they're not related at all. I've said God and good were related. I was wrong. It comes from a Proto-Germanic word that has to do with sacrifice. And this is an interesting thing. I think this is true. In that language, it was only used to describe foreign gods, the root where we get the word God. It wasn't used to describe the deities that they worshiped within their own culture. And really, you can see how Western Christianity, because it's tied to the idea of sacrifice. Almost all belief down through the ages, from maybe the beginning of time, the belief in the gods, foundational to it, intrinsic to the idea, was the idea of sacrifice. You can't say God, at least in its roots and its etymology, you can't say God without saying sacrifice. Certainly, in Western Christianity, you can't say God without sacrifice. And that's being taken to a new level by progressive Christianity, because the idea is that we know God by looking at the person of Jesus, and the highest expression, we know love by looking at the person of Jesus, and the highest expression of love is sacrifice, self-sacrifice, based on the sacrifice of Jesus. Well, what if there is a divine intelligence very much involved that has a will to good for all of us that has nothing to do with sacrifice, nothing whatsoever to do with sacrifice, not requiring any level of sacrifice, nor is sacrifice then an intrinsic component, much less the highest expression of love. What if we begin there and then start thinking, perhaps the cosmos, the universe, physical reality, has a cosmic parent. Perhaps I have a cosmic parent. And so what I'm really interested in, what I'm really curious about, is how would we revise our understanding of God to land sort of in a fourth place? Because the New Age is still very much governed by Judeo-Christian principles, Judeo-Christian assumptions and presuppositions. If in no other place this is evident, by the emphasis upon love and light. The definitions of love and light are very similar, very much like, if not exactly like, the concepts of love and light that come down to us from the Abrahamic faiths, from Western traditions. What if there's a fourth place? What if there's new ways of thinking about this and dialoguing about this? What if there are new ways of experiencing this reality? What if it's safe? The Western idea of God, if it exists at all, outside of Judeo-Christianity, is really deism. It's just God's kind of the big watchmaker in the sky that put all these physical laws into motion, sort of wound up the watch and is watching it tick down. If there is a God, that God exists and he doesn't give an F about us. That's the position of deism. There is no will to good in the universe. The universe is not out to preserve your life, even though humanity's been preserved for a really long time. And life on this planet's been preserved for much, 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 much longer. The universe is out to kill you. It's not very hospitable. See, if I believe that, if I believe the universe is out to kill me, I don't have a home. I don't have any place that I really belong. I definitely don't have the safety that is necessary to hospitality. And in my view, necessary to well-being. And so I think, and one of the things I want to explore then is, because again, we just become reductionistic. And one of my goals, and again, I'm not speaking, saying, hey, you got to believe this, or this is how you need to think. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying this is how I'm thinking and sharing it with you and hoping that it provokes thought and is a benefit and a blessing to you that will ultimately help you find a place of well-being in your overall life. What if we begin to in other words, we become reductionistic if we say, I'm God, that's it. I'm God. The self is God. It's reductionistic. Both physicalism, evolution, leaves humanity at the apex. Religion, or at the top of the food chain, if nothing else, the dominant species upon the planet. We observe physical reality and we can deduce the nature of physical reality through our observations. Humanity's at the top. Then Christianity, we're made in the image of God, the image and likeness of God. We will judge angels, the Apostle Paul said. To say that God became man is to say that man is God. So humanity at the top. Other metaphysical worldviews, not shaped by Western thinking, predominant Western thinking, I should say it that way. Maybe humanity isn't at the top. It can be a challenge, right? But even this idea, well, I am God, and that's as far as we go. I mean, you guys know that I truly believe that. So what do I believe at this point? Let me just finish with this. I believe in consciousness. I believe that what John said in John chapter 1, in the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. And John's not introducing a new idea that's a Christian idea. He's introducing a concept of the time period, a philosophical concept that way predates the idea of the Logos. And we translate it word, but it's a horrible translation. Consciousness might be the better way to understand it. In the beginning was mind. In the beginning was consciousness. In the beginning was Logos. And the word, by the way, for beginning is also the word where we get in the Greek, where we get the word for the idea of principle, a principle, or origin, or source. It's present tense, not just dealing with something in time and space. We have to squeeze it into time and space because our presuppositions are so shaped by the consensus trance of physicalism. So I believe that. I believe that consciousness is primary. In that sense, I'm very much an idealist philosophically. What's an idealist? An idealist is someone who believes that consciousness is how we arrive at base reality, and that everything that is material is born out of awareness, consciousness. And have to take time to identify consciousness. The consciousness is eternal. And therefore, because I am a conscious entity, because I can't stop the generation of thoughts. Now, maybe somebody who's practiced Zen Buddhism for years, I've never talked to anybody, so I don't know. I'm not ruling out the possibility that people can just go completely empty through meditation, where there's not thought. I know for a fact from my own experience, you can slow it down. You can experience the gaps in between thoughts and lengthen those gaps in meditation. That's been my experience. That would be my testimony. For everybody else, unless you're a Zen master, you can't stop your thoughts. You can't stop yourself from dreaming at night. Even when you shut down the physical senses and go to sleep, there is a field of consciousness out of which imagery and story and imagination is bubbling up from within you, is rising up from within you. And that place that dreams come from, in my worldview, is base reality. It's the foundation of all that is, or what John called the Logos, what the philosophers called Logos. In the beginning was the Logos. And so primarily what it means to be human is not, for me, that's again my worldview, the biological stuff that's going on in my physical body. The totality of my existence is not from the day of my birth to whenever I expire. My real existence, my foundational existence, my principal existence is Logos. It's coming from this world of consciousness. Thoughts, feelings, experiences, dreams, visions, intuition, rationalism, reason, logic. Did I say imagination? All of it is Logos. And that is who I am. And that is the ground of being, the foundational and principal reality. And you have the same thing. Hopes, dreams, fears, love, values, imagination, logic, rationalism. And I don't even have access to those things. It is uniquely those things, the way they are made up, what makes you tick. It's uniquely you. And so from that origin of Logos, you are a Logos. From that origin of word, you are a word. From that origin of dreams, you are a dream. Uniquely, profoundly unique. And embraced by, let's call it, a secret lover, the parent Logos, if you will. You're part of it, not separate from it, but the separation and the individuality is undeniable because it's true of all of our experience. And with that uniqueness comes the freedom of expression and choice. Not absolute freedom, because to be absolutely free, you'd have to cease to be of the same essence as the Logos. But definitely your own expression, guided by principle and intention and the will to good, the will to your benefit, the will to your well-being. You're a child of that parent, or in that sense, a child of God, but not separate. And what if, because the formation of the consensus trance of religion is intertwined with power and politics, and so therefore it benefits the state it benefits the religious leaders. It benefits somebody somewhere is benefiting in terms of power through an articulation of this parent, of this being, of this God in state and political and moral terms to govern your thinking and your behavior. In other words, Jesus is King. God is Lord, the supreme ruler. It's all political metaphors and political language. He sits upon a throne. He rules in the heavens. He subdues his enemies under his feet. These are all political terms, political metaphors, power brokering. God is like Caesar. God is like the Pope. God is like the king. And so therefore, obedience in thought, justification by faith, or obedience in morals and ethics and teachings, the gospel accounts of many of the teachings of Jesus. Gnostic gospels have something completely different, and the parables are also different. Go into the world and make disciples of all nations, teaching them to obey whatever I have taught you. If you obey my commandments, if you obey my word, God will abide in you and you will abide in God. If you obey my word, love will be perfected in you, and love is the ultimate. See, all of that stuff's based on subjugation, not expression. All of that stuff is based on stay with the sheep, get to the grass, eat the grass, don't wake up, don't go your own way. Don't be a free thinker. Don't step outside the box. And if you do, you're on the side of evil. If you do, you're on the side of the devil. You're on the side of the adversary. You have become Satan. The word Satan simply means the adversary, the one that is in opposition, the one who is opposing, the one who is left-handed, the one that is opposite. So that becomes the category. And so we think metaphysically then that there must also be these categories, these absolute categories and bifurcations of good and evil. And we want to follow the good, which will lead to life, and not follow the evil, which will lead to death. We want to be a sheep and not a goat. And what I'm saying is, if we understand that those were hypnotic mental constructs that became part of the consensus trance, the original PSYOP, if you will, psychological operation for the purpose of dominance and warfare. Religion became its tool. And it's interesting how powerfully it's worked. Because for most people, if I'm not religious, I'm an atheist. I reject metaphysics out of hand because I'm freeing myself from the mind control and the PSYOP and the illusion and the dream that all that stuff is real. And so my question is, what would life look like if it opened up to us with the understanding that consciousness is primary, logos is primary? We are logos. We are a unique individual expression existing within a physical world and a world beyond the physics. Doesn't make the physical world bad. I'm not being Gnostic in that sense. Physical world is evil. It's a tomb for the soul. It's a prison. I'm not being negative towards material world at all. We're here to experience the material world. I'm just saying I refuse to reduce who I am down to the totality of just being a physical being. And that we have the freedom to imagine, to relate to this cosmic parent. I like that. I think instead of saying God, I'm going to start saying our cosmic parent who art in heaven. Hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. And this cosmos of consciousness is infinite. And so therefore, infinite possibilities and potentials open up for us. What does this mean? You know what this means? This means not only do you have freedom of expression, but it also means that you are eternal. You are an eternal part. You are a light that will never go out. What does this mean? This means that there is existence after death, because if physicalism is all there is, there can be no existence after death. Life after death opens up. You know what else opens up? Prayer. In other words, when we say I am God, and we emphasize the law of attraction, which I do, I believe that, listen, I came out of a very, 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 very serious health crisis in August, September. Thankfully, I'm on the other side of that now. Doctor verified. I know part of the way I got there was applying principles of cause and effect that originated with my faith, not faith in God to do something, but mind over matter type of stuff. I have no doubt that I am healthy today because of mind over matter and principles of that I applied. But I'm also aware of the fact that there are forces that I cannot influence by myself. I'm aware of the fact that there are circumstances that I'm going to face that are too big for me, too overwhelming for me, too much of a struggle for me. There are people that I care about and that I love. They're going to face situations and are facing situations right now that I have no ability, naturally or, dare I say, supernaturally, to influence, not through the law of attraction, not through mind over matter. Yeah, I can send positive energy, I can send positive thoughts, I can do all that stuff. But it's like we have a bias against prayer in this community. What if prayer is not sacrifice? What if prayer is not kneeling? What if prayer is perhaps petitioning? But even the word petition comes from a monarchy idea of bringing a request to the king in hopes of the king. See, it was just filled with this monarchical. I want to say monarchical. Kind of put monarch and maniacal together. Monarchical. If there's a word out there like that, somebody let me know. A monarchical idea of petitioning. In other words, putting out an intention, putting out a hope, putting out a wish, asking for help from, asking for wisdom from, asking for guidance from, asking for support from this cosmic parent, and realizing that there is guidance and there is intervention and there is care and there is love and the will to good. And by good, I don't mean it in a moral sense. I mean sense of well-being, versus sense of being unwell. All right. Took me longer than I wanted it to. Look at a few of the comments here. Again, I can only see the ones on YouTube for some reason. Jason says goats browse instead of graze. A goat may eat your crops but will not totally destroy them. I love it when people address the difference between believing and knowing. We need true science instead of scientism. Profound statement there. I was very happy to learn that the original use, this is all Jason, very happy to learn that the original use of tarot cards was for self-evaluation and improvement. I learned that from Mark Pasillo. I think I'm saying that right. Let's go into Facebook here and see what we got. Hopefully I can do this. Shannon Morris says the more we intercede for one another, the better. Lynn, it's good to see you back on here, buddy. But I can't see the comment. All right, I can only see a few comments, so maybe there's only been a few that have been made. I can see Shannon's comment. Lynn says those situations happen for us. He also says when you don't have beliefs anymore and you see, you can't unsee. Those not dialed into that frequency won't see it. It just is what it is. Yeah, like that comment. Thank you, Lynn. All right. Thanks, everybody, for watching this. I hope you benefited from this. Please, please, please put some stuff in the comments. I will definitely go back and look at those today. Enjoy. If your thing is the Super Bowl, I realize there's some controversy around that. I haven't kept up with it. So if I'm being controversial or offensive, I don't mean to be. I don't even know what that's about. But I know there's a lot of people, I'm being told, who are boycotting the Super Bowl. So if you're boycotting the Super Bowl, great, because our arch rival, I'm a Denver fan, so our arch rival has been the Chiefs, and they're probably going to win. Be the first team to make it 3 in a row. But anyway, if you watch it for the commercials, if you just watch it to get together, or you don't watch it at all, enjoy yourself this afternoon. Thank you for watching. Please leave some comments. If you're watching this on YouTube and you've not joined the New Day Global community, I would suggest that you get on Facebook, and you can, I think, find the link in my bio on YouTube, but you can also just type in New Day Global Community. It's a private group. You do have to answer the questions, agree to the rules, agree to play nice in the sandbox, all that good stuff. And then we can bring you in, and there's other content. Lots of really great thinkers and deep thinkers, not just myself. In fact, I share far less content than some people, but all of it's good. All of it's beneficial, profitable. It's a community of people. Don't want to get into groupthink. It's not about me or telling people what. That's why it's not the Aaron Tomlinson Facebook page. It's New Day Global Community. If you appreciate the work that I'm doing, please help us out with some donations. That would be great. That'd be wonderful. That would be really, really helpful. You can do that only through PayPal right now, but you can go to paypal.me/New Day Global, paypal.me/New Day Global, and make a one-time donation or set up regular donations. Those of you that have given and do give on a regular basis, it helps us out tremendously. Thank you so much. I've had people reach out to me and say, well, I don't have much to give, $5, $1, whatever. If this has meant something to you, if this has been beneficial to you, I also believe there is a principle of energy exchange and giving to where you are receiving from. I believe there's value in that. I'm trying to make my content free. And so if you appreciate it and can make a donation, that'd be awesome. Otherwise, God bless you. Namaste. Be at peace. Be well. Hope I didn't piss you off. I love all of you. And I will see you in the New Day Global group this week. I plan on doing 1 or 2 lives extra. Or I'll see you next week. Or I'll see you Friday for Freeology.